Today it's Nat and I ideal class size of 2. We're, I thought today we would take a look at this thing I started thinking about for the high school I graduated from. A small private school, and was small then. I've been told now it's not small anymore, but too bad. Called Severn, and the school's named for the Severn River, which is also named for a river in England. So it's kind of a little bit of a British tradition. Most of the faculty, as near as I could tell, are retired naval people, which makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of Navy people, officers, went to Annapolis, and a lot of them retire at Annapolis. So I think it's a wonderful way to get really first-rate people. These guys are typically, Marine generals, this kind of thing, commanders. So they've got a lot of education, they've got experience in the military discipline, so pretty ideal. So they contacted me about a reunion of my class. I'm not interested at all. Class of 62. I think most of us are dead, frankly. But so I sent my bio and said if I can help out, like counseling students or something. So about 3 or 4 months went by and I forgot about it. And this lady, Carol Campion, very nice lady, contacted me and said that she's been talking to the head of the school. They would like me to come speak at this lecture series, David Askell Memorial Lecture Series. I, of course, had never heard of this guy. I thought it was quite ideal. It's going to be a 2 talks, one at lunchtime for the class, the students, and one in the evening for the faculty and parents. So I'm really looking forward to this. The only thing I'm a little bit worried about is it's not the Severn I knew. Someone told me the buildings I was in are all gone. So it's a completely different place. And I guess too surprising. It's been, how many years? 60 years later. So, I mean, be surprised if nothing happened. Anyway, I was class of 62, and this guy died when he was riding in a car and a deer jumped in front and he died. And I thought about this talk, and my first thought, I may have discussed this last week with you, was to talk about the state of being of integrity. And so that's the first thing that came to my mind. Then I thought, I looked at, they told me the guy who had preceded me the year before had films with 6 Academy Award nominations in my same class. I don't remember him. But I was not very close to the class. And the reason was that I was only there as a senior, and hard to get there. There was no public transportation where I lived. It was kind of a rural place on the waterfront, not far from the highway these days, but in those days it wasn't much. So a friend of my mother's had a son who went there, who drove me. I rode with him in his car. And the problem with it was that he had 0 interest in anything extracurricular. So his rule was we didn't let the class. Immediately after class, we went home, and thinking back on it, I might have been able to impose on my parents, but it was a pretty long drive. It was a sort of half hour each way. And my father wasn't, he's working in Washington. He wasn't available. So anyway, I never did anything socially with the classmates except the lunchtime. And we ate lunch in a little day room. I don't remember, probably brought lunch in is my guess. And we played bridge at lunch for an hour, which is
really,
which was really just what everybody did. And have you ever played bridge?
So fun fact, I have.
Okay.
I think bridge is one of those games where it's very regional. Because like my father grew up in Maine and they were huge bridge players, but then my college roommate was from upstate New York and they were euchre players.
What?
And then I think there's like pockets of, you either kind of feels like you're either a euchre player or a bridge player on the East Coast.
I like
it's very similar to bridge, slightly different, but yeah. So my father and all of his brothers, there were 3 of them. So I was the 4th.
Okay.
I was terrible.
Okay.
But I was the 4th.
So you know the game, and
I do know the game. Yeah.
And I like the game because it's, as you know, it's very strategic.
Mm-hmm.
And you can win with any hand. It's not like,
Right,
you get a hand that's a winner or a loser. You,
right.
I don't got to explain to you how it works, but anyway, so I enjoyed playing bridge and, it was not duplicate bridge, it was just playing against each other. So we just all
Okay,
tables
gotcha.
and play. And, I was reasonably good at it. I wouldn't, just for someone who started fresh, I could play socially with people without it and read a magazine at the same time while everybody else is absorbed.
Yep.
Anyway, so I enjoyed it there, and so I don't know what the other speakers said, but I thought that I should talk about the namesake. By the way, they're going to treat me well. I'm going to fly out first class. I told them I needed to fly first class, and no blink on that. Not expensive to go to Maryland first class.
Right.
They're going to put me up at Annapolis Waterfront Hotel, which is nice. I'll be downtown Annapolis. And
Very cool.
just FYI, the talk is on Thursday. I'll fly out Wednesday. Friday, I'll check out the hotel and go stay with my son CJ, who lives in Annapolis, of course. And this photograph is his speedboat from 3 or 4
Right.
years ago. So I'll spend the weekend with them and come home. So that's a nice little trip.
Okay.
So I thought that I should speak to this guy's death. So here's what I was gonna do. I'll start with this story. The king felt sad, so he asked the court jester to cheer him up. The jester said, by the way, this is told in about 10 different ways, whether it's the king or the emperor or whatever.
Okay.
The story is like a common story. The grandfather died, the father died, then the son died. The king became angry and said, I told you to tell me a happy story, and this is not. The jester answered, our lives are all finite, and this is the natural order of things. Therefore, is not an evil curse, but a great blessing for your family. So I was going to start by saying that, and then say, I acknowledge the grief of David's parents and friends as perhaps inconsolable. Nevertheless, let's bow our heads, take a moment of silence, and experience the sadness of this loss forever. This you might recognize is very similar to what I do in the workshops with Hubble.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was going to talk about what is death. And I was reflecting with a colleague about physicist Richard Feynman. This is not true. I was watching actually the truth is, I'm gonna tell the truth I'm not gonna tell the truth when I do it in person, but I was watching this on a YouTube video, but I think it's the same thing. And thinking about this, and the guy in the YouTube video said, I'm sorry, Feynman's dead. I never met him. And I realized that that's irrelevant. So I never met, the story I'm going to tell is I never met him. This is true. My advisor at Catholic, when I was preparing for my comprehensive exam, she said, here's the blue books. It's a physics textbook. So if you understand this totally, you're ready for a master's degree. And here's Feynman's red books, which was a freshman class at Caltech, but the people in the audience are mostly other professors. And I said, if you understand the red books, you know enough physics for a PhD. So I actually took 2 months of vacation time, my total vacation time. I could have done this and charged it to the government, but I just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. And I studied all day, every day in the library at Goddard. And those days there was no internet, right? So you didn't even have a calculator. So you went to the library. And I read these red books and pretty much understood them. And turned out I aced the exam. I just realized that the exam was very conceptual. And maybe my counselor had something to do with putting this exam together. He's a full professor. Maybe he was telling me something that this is a very conceptual exam and this is the way to get ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the highest score in the class, which was not very unexpected because I'm not that good a physicist, I don't think. Anyway, so it's a shame he's deceased. And I said, not at all. His body is no longer, but just as alive in our thoughts as if he were fully alive. In fact, I never met him. And his corporal existence or not has no bearing on my experience of him. Similarly, other people like General Humble, my best friend in high school was a couple of years younger than me, Pete Humble, lived in the neighborhood. Neighborhood meant he was like a half mile away. And I got to know his father really well, retired Marine general. He was a teacher at Severn. And I'm not going to tell all these details, but I was in I finished my third year in military academy. And my father wanted me to graduate. That was important to him. And I said, I'm not going back. I've had enough. He said, yes, you are. I said, no, I'm not. So I managed to get General Hummel to pull some strings, I suppose. I think very unusual for a school like this to let anybody come in as a senior. Everybody else there, it had a grade school as well and a junior high. Most of the guys in the class had been together for many years. So
Mhm.
I got admitted and said, you know, as far as paying for it, it's got to be cheaper than military school because I'm going to live at home. So he said he finally relented. So I went. And so I think about him still. By the way, just between us, he died of a very horrible form of throat cancer.
Mm.
And I spent a lot of time with him in his last days just by having to be around. And the other person that was really memorable for me was the chemistry teacher, a guy named Commander Seeger, a small man. You think of military guys as being big, but he wasn't.
Mhm.
He would stand on top of the desk during class to yell at us. And you don't forget that. And
Nope.
they say things like today's class is going to be how you flush a toilet in a submarine, which is something that for high school guys sounded pretty cool.
Mhm.
And at Drexel, they had these courses that, by the way, I've got someone coming to repair the elevator. If they come, I'm gonna have to interrupt and let them in the house. I
Sure.
don't need to be with them, just say hello, let them in the door. So anyway, so I really learned chemistry from him, and chemistry at Drexel, uh, typical technical schools have classes that are designed to weed out people. The full intention is that half the students are gone the first year, and that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
Chemistry was the class that did it. So I went to the department and said, I know chemistry, I don't need to take this course. And they laughed at me. And I said, give me a test. And they did. And I skipped college chemistry. That's how good that class was,
The high school class was.
high school class. And my memories are alive from the friends in the day room. John Manili, I heard recently died, I don't know. And Jace Lieber, I didn't really have much to do with, but his name stuck with me because it's a different name. And anyway, so that's that. And then so that sets up the idea that you could talk, that you communicate with dead people because they're still alive in your minds. And I referenced the Dead Poets Society. I'm sure you've seen that movie. Probably
Yep.
everybody has. In fact, one of my undergraduate classes gave me a DVD with that movie, which was meaningful for me. And so I think the message is you can hear voices of the past by quietly listening. I say, at this moment, I hear David speaking. He softly says, the greatest gift that people can have at any age is that we're on borrowed time. They don't want to squander it on stupid stuff. So I'm going to pretend that I hear his voice.
I like it.
What do you think? Good? Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think a recent high school graduate would language it that way, stupid stuff, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
That may
When,
be the elevator people. Hang on a second. Yeah, I'll be right back. I'm going
sure.
to pause the recording and let them in.
Okay.
I had to take a break there for the elevator repair guy. I'm back again. So I don't know if other people address this guy at all, but I kind of like this. I thought this was a good way to do it. And then I tell a story about uh, trying to illustrate 4D approach. And I beefed
Mhm.
this up since the last time I wrote it, but this is true. Frank Martin came to me and said, he was that time director of astrophysics. I'm leaving within a year. You're the only person I trust. And the point is the trust. So that's what I've talked about a lot, the importance of being trusted.
Mhm.
Being my deputy, you can take over when I leave. Of course, it wasn't really Frank's to say whether I was going to be director. That was up to the new boss, who, by the way,
Right.
didn't like me, but we overcame that with some external intervention. But
Right.
anyway, I was delighted. And so Hubble Space Telescope was my biggest headache. And the managers who preceded me ran a fictitious and pervasive storyline that the project was easy. And the footnote says the reason was that the DoD or three-letter agencies were flying these keyhole satellites that for since the 70s, and they grossly under budgeted the project, so constant overruns. And they put in place an inappropriate complex organizational arrangement to placate political interest. And the reason they did all these things is they mistakenly thought it was easy. They never did the proper studies beforehand to understand how complex it really was. So finally, with great fanfare, it launched in April '90, and an error in the simplest part of the telescope, the primary mirror, which is a very complex undertaking, was fatally flawed. There was no apparent remedy, so the telescope was deemed a total failure. So I'm sort of opening up with this, I think it's important how you open up with this very dramatic thing, probably the most dramatic thing I can tell. Barb Mikulski summoned me to her office. After ranting, she pushed me in the chest with her finger. Never be an appropriate dollar fix this telescope. Nightmare has to go away. Administrator Truly, who I was actually quite fond of, said, "You heard the Congresswoman." "Yes, sir." So I checked my state of being by noticing my feelings. So now I'm into a teaching moment with this example. I felt lousy. You feel lousy, you're almost surely in a drama state. Then I look at what am I thinking? What storyline am I running? This was easy. I'm thinking I cannot even try to fix a telescope because powerful people forbid me to do so. It's hopeless. The word hopeless is the trigger. That means you're in victim. So how do you get out of this? You shift your thought. You can always change what you think to, I must fix the telescope, then I will fix the telescope. A shift in emotions inevitably soon followed. I felt alive, energized, even glad. I legally moved funds in a secret account and engaged trusted colleagues to covertly seek a fix. Why did I do this? There's nothing in it for me. Certainly not in comparison to the immense downside risk. These people could fire me just by saying goodbye. Probably even remove me from the federal government if they so choose.
Right.
Perhaps this quote explains it all. There are no great men, only great challenges that ordinary men like you and me are forced by circumstances to meet, from a Navy admiral. I really glommed onto this idea. There are no great men. So I've been writing a little informal autobiography for a few years now. I retitled it to "There Are No Great Men." I think it's I think it would kind of like my life story. So it may seem like an odd title. It's how I see myself in my life. You'll see many remarkable accomplishments. I do not attribute them to who I am, rather how I've chosen to act in difficult situations. Then you may see this as modesty. I assure you it is not. I'm choosing to draw an analogy, a comparison, simply to make a point and nothing more, between my life and people like Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Churchill. What we all have in common is that no one thought any of us would accomplish anything important or significant, yet we rose to meet great challenges, each in our own way. Wow. I'm naming the source of the great successes, actions one can choose rather than something innate. It suggested doing this has very important advantages. First, it reduces one's propensity for the mental illness of narcissism. And I got a reference to DSM, which is the main thing psychologists characterize.
Yep.
Listen.
Yep.
And when I got up every morning and people are kowtowing to me literally at work, I said to myself, just keep in your mind, it's not about you, it's about the job you're in. Because the day you're not in that job, then I can give you the time of day. It turned out that wasn't true, but still it's okay to think that way, I think. And second, because it's not innate, you can learn how to rise to meet circumstances. The expression I probably hate more than any others is leaders are born, not made. That's such baloney. And finally, greatness is available to ordinary people. And this quote, like you and me, is new to the quote, but I saw his writing, that's what he claims he said. I'm hoping this might help you. So how do you do this? I don't know. I was at a business lunch in Dallas. I have a big room full of people, maybe 200 or 300 people, I don't know. And I was a lunchtime speaker, and this very obnoxious reporter kept me to the last minute. And what I really wanted to do, I thought I could deal with her in about 10 minutes and move on. And then have an hour or so to get ready for the talk. I had to walk right into the thing. Now I'm hungry to boot. I'm on travel. So I'm trying to eat my lunch, and the guy next to me starts talking about his father and asking me about my father, just out of the blue. And what occurred to me was that my father, spending a career as a military pilot, surely connected to purpose. And so I must have learned that from him. And then a simpler explanation, when I was 8 years old, I adopted "Be Sure You're Right, Then Go Ahead" from Davy Crockett. I had a coonskin cap. Frank, when he read this, said he had a coonskin cap too. So,
So did I.
did you? Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Love Davy Crockett.
I knew mine for sure because it was in the car and a cat shit in it. Cat used it for a litter box. But ultimately, I think it's about managing. There's the diagnostic statistical manual reference.
Yep.
And I realized I'm going over a lot of stuff, and so I'm saying, if you really want to understand all this, you should probably read my book, How NASA Builds Teams. It's quite a thorough exposition of all this.
Mm-hmm.
Then consider integrity. We're talking about your trustworthiness, and I think this is right. It bears on every aspect of your life, including your acceptance to a university. Yeah, so I'm thinking that might be on these people's minds. And researchers, I saw some research about MBAs applying for jobs, and they were stressing over their grades. And yet, when the researchers debriefed the people who did and did not get hired, they said, what we're really trying to figure out first is whether you're trustworthy. And if you think about it, if you had a choice to hire someone who's trustworthy and not top of the class, or untrustworthy and top, which would you hire?
Mm-hmm.
The trustworthiness. And I think that we quickly decide whether we believe someone's trustworthy or not. So in the past, I talked about an idea I got from my friend Hendricks, said people look like they're fuzzy walking down the aisle, but in thinking about this myself, I said, no, I think it's actually, there are really clear signals. They're comfortable in their own skins, they're authentic, they laugh easily, and they exude calm. So think about our election. You see anybody that's more trustworthy than not in it? Okay.
Yeah. Just watching the debate, it's like,
I know,
wow,
I know.
he's
So
coming unhinged.
I completely, so, by the way, one something to worry about. I heard that there's a 1 in 4 chance that thing's gonna go to the House. There won't be enough plurality in the electoral college.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Anyway, sorry to bring that up. Anyway, what, we've been in evolutionary battle for survival. Every species is. It's the nature of the earth. And what could be more important than to quickly identify who's trustworthy and who's not? How important is that when you're living in a 50-person tribe? It's everything.
Yeah.
I think this is wired into the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
The choice to live in integrity is freely available to every person on the planet. If you choose to embody it, in contrast to material goods, no one can take it from you. I like this idea. It's yours.
Mm-hmm.
It's yours to have or not. It's really about your deeds matching your words. It's this simple. Commit to rigorously keeping your agreements and renegotiating problematic risks before you break them. Like this Emerson quote, what you do speaks so loudly I can't hear what you say. So now
Yeah.
you understand integrity as a state of being, and maybe I need to clarify that a little better up here, come to think of it. What happens when you break an agreement? Well, now you're out of integrity. To return, you must process it. Your first thought might be to apologize. That can work for minor trivial agreements, broken agreements, but you must do more for more serious infractions, i.e. things that cause inconvenience to others, serious inconvenience, or let me make a note here, hang on.
Sure.
So Anyway, you tell the difficult truth, I broke my agreement with you, then describe the circumstances, how you will prevent recurrences, then apologize. Complete the process by asking, are we okay now? You can live in integrity if you choose to do so.
Mhm.
So having mastered this, you can go deeper by noticing your self-talk and storylines you spontaneously generate. We define these as thoughts that are true for us, but not the truth because they're arguable. One can characterize them as green or red, depending on whether they support you in achieving outcomes that you want or not. Since they are not the truth, you can choose them. At the most basic level, you want to stop storylines that take you into drama states, for example, blamer and victim, and run storylines that take you into responsibility, i.e., the ability to respond. The problem in my life, other people's lives, is not the absence of knowing what to do, but the absence of doing it. Amen. At a more advanced level, one can enter the highly outcome-focused state of 100% commitment, which alters perception, illuminating the path to success while obscuring obstacles. Top athletes routinely do this, as you can see in movies like For the Love of the Game. I'm sure you've seen that clip in the workshop.
Mhm.
I frequently visit the flight deck on long international flights. There's plenty of time to go up there because the flight prep, you board the plane earlier than a domestic flight. You're on the cover, and they're up there getting. By the time I get there, we'll say half an hour to take off. They're pretty well set in what they're going to do. That they've gone over the route in briefings in the terminal, the whole flight deck together. There's usually, if you go to China, there's 4 of them.
Mhm.
And they're, when I tell them a little bit about my background, they're always happy to see me and talk, very friendly. Sometimes they'll even show me the flight plan and talk about it. They take me into their rest quarters, show me that. So what interests me about landing airplanes is that it's almost totally done by hand flying. There are a few Category 3 auto lands, but they're rare. And the reason they're rare is only used when visibility is 0, 0. And the airport has, the air traffic control has to do a lot of special things, has to make sure there's no planes in the vicinity. You need bigger spacing. And even on the ground, they clear away areas near the runway of other airplanes, just in case you make a mistake.
Mhm.
Most of the time, they're hand flying it. So about, I'm gonna say a minute before, the way this works is you hear a ding, a double ding about 20 minutes out.
Mhm.
And the cabin crew will make an announcement. What they're telling the cabin crew is, we're now in sterile cockpit. That means you don't contact us for anything less than an emergency. So we're starting to get focused. Yeah, listen to air traffic control on United. I used to, and it's rarer and rarer now. And that's my favorite thing to listen to. And you'll hear them cleared. So what happens is the airplane flight path, well, once it leaves the vicinity of the airport, is all set by the dispatcher of the airline. And they're mostly worried about wind. They're trying to get favorable winds because it saves fuel. And they worry about things like these long flights, what's called ETOPS. You need to have alternate airports within certain, the planes are certified for various durations of single engine recovery to a backup airport.
Right.
These latest airplanes is 3 hours, so it's almost a non-issue. Anyway, so that's all. So then when they get to the airport, the airport takes over. There's a sort of a point where the control transfers away from the company dispatch guidance to the airport, and they'll tell them on arrival with some kind of code. In Denver, the arrival from the West Coast is Civet 4. I've done it so many times, I know the code. And that's a very set of procedures that ends up with a designation of a runway. And usually there's two choices at Denver. There's parallel runways. So they'll say expect runway, 21 right. But that's not a firm runway. And they'll talk them through this turn by turn. They'll finally say pick up vectors to the localizer. That's their name for the ILS system. And before that, the airplane will be confirmed as stable, which means It's in the landing configuration, flaps are set, gears down, and the plane, everything's working correctly, you know, everything's stable is the right word. Everything's cross-checked. Now that it's stable, they'll typically turn off the autopilot, and whoever's gonna be the pilot flying will take the controls and hand fly it down all the way to the ground. So you think about, Denver alone must have 300 landings a day, I'm guessing, so 400 landings.
Yeah, I don't know.
And worldwide, there's 50 times as many, I don't know. So these things happen over and over and over routinely, and this is with sometimes failed systems on the airplanes. The bigger issue is gusty crosswinds. Crosswinds require you to crab the plane in and then make a sharp turn just as you touch the runway. It's complicated stuff. So how they so reliably, I mean, crashes are almost non-existent. And the answer the pilots tell me is nothing exists but me in the airplane. I'm 100% committed, the way I use the language. And when they say when it's entered that state, there's no difficulty. It's completely focused on what they've got to do. And I say, what do you tell yourself to get into that state? I say, it's a matter of life and death. By the way, so I didn't finish completely the air traffic control story. So they'll be getting this chatter all the way down, sometimes frequently turn left to pick up this, descend to, 1,000 feet, whatever, turn left to some vector. And then you hear clear to land is dead silence. Air traffic control does not turns any radio communication with them off. No other airplanes, no nothing. So they're also giving the sterile cockpits. So everyone's supporting this place of focus, and so the pilots do it. So that's how you want to be. That's the state I went into with Hubble, and that's how I did what I did. The quiet of my office, thinking about it, and I never said to myself, what happens if they catch me doing this? It wasn't even on the table. Anyway, so that's how you can do extraordinary challenges. However, just like the examples of throwing a pitch or landing an airplane, you need repetition, you need to practice. So begin practicing this now. Think about something you want to commit to and begin doing this. So the common denominator of me doing this is a purpose higher than me, transcending my personal needs. And my commitment to integrity gave me the backbone to take action. I think if you're living in a state of broken agreements, it's hard to do that. A summary of this from supposedly part of this has been pillaged, I think, from ancient India, but anyway, I can't trace back these quotes to their source sometimes. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, a chance to draw back. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there's one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. The moment one definitely commits oneself, providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that never would have otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meeting and material assistance which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. Whatever you can do or dream, you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. So that's now the introduction to my autobiography that goes on to a bunch of trivial stuff. What do you think?
I like it. And so this is going to be the basis for your talk. And
the talk is going to start with the same this remembrance of David. That's for sure.
Yep.
The rest of the talk I have not structured yet, but I thought this was a good. The talk is not necessarily. It's probably not going to follow this exactly. I think it's maybe too much to take in.
Okay. Yeah.
One mouthful.
Yeah.
I'll go into it more slowly. The one thing I thought I might do, I think I've got an hour. I'm going to ask them to confirm that. I assume an hour, but I'm going to ask them to check. But if I can, I'm going to say, I thought I was going to make the great observatories the theme of the talk. And I was gonna say, introduce them to storylines, the idea. And say, I was running a storyline, so I'm director of astrophysics. And I've got, my job is to get the money and then allocate the money. I've got lots of power. And I asked myself, why am I here and what am I here to do? And the answer is that the basic idea of physics is you make advance with experiments. And historically, especially in astronomy, there have been advances in astronomical knowledge that come with advances in measurement capability. In fact, all of the big advances in physics come from some experiment that was done so carefully and so precisely that the results couldn't be assailed. For example, the so-called two-slit experiment measuring the speed of, I'm sorry, the interferometer measuring the speed of light was done by many people, but it was done so carefully by some people, and it showed that the speed of light is a constant in vacuum. When it was done so carefully, the mirrors were floated on Mercury, for example. It was done so precisely. It could not be discounted. That led Einstein to the theory of special relativity.
Mm-hmm.
The two-slit experiment, done very carefully, including with electrons, led people to what's called the wave-particle duality and then quantum mechanics. So what I said is that there are things in the universe that we physically do not understand. And one of my favorite examples is things like a quasar emits as much energy in a few seconds as the sun does in its whole 8 billion year lifetime. That's interesting to a physicist. So, what I reasoned was that if you can, that something like a quasar emits in all radiation bands. It emits in infrared, the sub-millimeter, visible light, ultraviolet, far ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays. The whole spectrum comes out when this thing's doing its thing. And so the way physics advances is you take data and you explain it with theories. People think theory means we're not sure about it. That's not what theory means. That's hypothesis. A theory in physics is something that we fail to disprove so many times we believe it's the truth. It's not. Hypothesis is the word people should use for what they think, what they normally think a theory is. So
right.
How do you do this? Well, you do make observations and then you write theories. And these are things like Maxwell's equations or relativity, these things. And the reason you write equations is that you want to be able to predict the future. That's what the game is about. So if you could measure things like quasars, which at the time were highly unknown objects, across all the wave bands contemporaneously, you could test theories of physics in ways that would create a new physics. And there's a fairly broad view among physicists that we're due for a revolution. Back in the late 1800s, it was widely believed that physics was done. There's nothing new there. Then came quantum mechanics, superconductivity, relativity, all this stuff. So it's been quiescent for 100 years. So it looked like we're ready to see a new physics, and the people looking at it with this accelerator in CERN for particle physics. And I looked at that and said, that's a factor of 10 in improvement. If I can launch telescopes in the space shuttle, I can get factors of improvement that are 10,000. If you look at the numbers that make up a quality of a measurement, that's its sensitivity, spectral resolution, angular resolution, things like this. So I've got the visible color with Hubble. At that time, there was no knowledge of a mirror flaw. Got the gamma ray regime covered with a mission that's underway called Gamma Ray Observatory. If I can add X-rays and infrared, we could, for the first time, measure these bizarre astronomical phenomena in ways that would be precise enough to test physics. In other words, that's the story that I ran. So the thing I had to do was to get the next mission done, which was the X-ray mission. And it was a difficult sell. First, Hubble was having overruns already.
Right.
And nobody understood X-ray astronomy in the lay world. But most of them didn't even understand visible light astronomy, really, I don't think, the lawyers. And so I ran into serious headwinds doing this. So I put together a plan to build this mission. It was modeled after, by the way, people before me had done some study work on this. It was modeled after Hubble. It was analogous. It was going to be, it looked like Hubble. It was going to be serviced by the shuttle, just like Hubble is, be in an orbit like Hubble.
Mhm.
So it looked like pretty well subtle thing. At that time, wasn't known that Hubble had these technical problems. It cost problems, not technical problems.
Right.
So the first buzzsaw I run into this is I've got to get some support with the Congress and the Office of Management and Budget. So I go over and talk to these people, and I might as well have been talking from Mars. These are lawyers. The only people who probably do worse in physics classes than lawyers are doctors. And their eyes would glaze over when I start to use even lay terms to talk about this. So I got the idea to have experts come in and make speeches, and I got some of my contractors to sponsor evening seminars on Capitol Hill, and they brought in a beer and wine and hors d'oeuvres to get people to come. So I tried this. This was just as bad. People came, they drank the wine and the beer, left when the talk started or paid no attention to it. And the university people that I brought in to do this were even worse because their university people are used to being busy showing everybody how smart they are.
Mhm.
And they did that, but they turned off the audience. That was a disaster. So I'm getting nowhere with this. I'm going to complete loss. So I decided that I needed some misdirection. At this point, I'll show that video of Teller in misdirection. So how did I misdirect them? Well, I quit talking about astronomy and started talking about physics because there's in general, I think, a sympathy in the government for the true idea that physics won World War II. There's no doubt about that. It wasn't just a nuclear weapon. It was everything. It was the radars. It was the
Right.
on and on and on. World War II was a technical war and won by physics. And so it was pretty easy to get people to understand that physics was important. Now I had to make a connection between physics and a bunch of telescopes. So how was I going to do that? So I realized I was thinking about this idea that the medium is the message. And I brought the best theorists I could find to NASA meet me for a one-day meeting and made cartoons that we compiled into a funny book. I thought cartoon books don't scare people.
Right.
So that was the first test. So the next thing that happens is I've got an idiot political appointee for a boss. He's got to decide which program gets a new start. So he hates to make decisions. So he arranges for us to go to a retreat in a place called Belmont. And I'm looking at this and I'm realizing that he's not fond of me. He doesn't like my program because my astronomers didn't kowtow to him. They saw him as stupid and basically inferentially told him that's what they thought of him. And so, and he likes favors. And Jet Propulsion Lab has a competing mission, and that's a planetary mission. And they're a contractor, so they can skirt legality, but treat him to lunch or dinners,
Right.
which are illegal. But he was a person who did not accept, as some other politicians did not accept that the government ethical rules applied to him.
Mhm.
So I found out that he's invited 10 people from Jet Propulsion Lab to this retreat that should be just his own office. I'm going to be seriously outnumbered. So this is a setup. So the guy's a facilitator, and the facilitator gets to the very last hour of this whole weekend retreat, the afternoon. I said to him, I said, "You've not yet addressed what we're all allegedly came here for, to set the new start priorities." He said, "You're right." And I said, "If you don't do that, what did we spend this whole weekend doing? We talked about nonsense." He said, "You're right." He says, "Okay, so here's what we're going to do." He says, "We're going to have a straw vote on this. The vote's not going to count for anything. and here's the rules. There's 9 candidates. You can vote for them in priority order, and you get 2 votes for each candidate, so you get 18 votes. You can vote them as you like. So I'm sitting there, and the guy next to me starts first, and he's being very diplomatic, but he's giving like a few more votes to the planetary mission than my missions. And I'm silent, so the order goes around the whole group. Must have been about 20 people, 20 people there. So everybody's doing the same thing, being very diplomatic. 3 votes here, 4 votes here, 3 votes here. But I'm steadily losing in this because I'm outnumbered. So gets to me and I say 18 votes for AXAF. And my boss jumps up and says, "You can't do that." And I said, "No, the facilitator, you said the rules are I can vote any way I wanted. And what about it?" And the guy says, "Yep, you can. That's what I said. You can vote any way you want. 18 votes for AXAF, put it in the top place." So, so, Bert was the boss's name. Bert curses me, gets up, and the meeting's finished. We walk out the door. Because I knew what would happen. I knew that once we got a vote, it would never, that would be the end of it, even though it's a straw vote. I knew Bert hated to make decisions. So as soon as he got this thing and got planetary in the top slot, which is what he wanted, that would be the end of it. So there we are. That was the second test. The third, by the way, that's the only year I was a senior executive. I got no bonus and didn't care. It was worth it. Shortly after that, Bert tried to get rid of me. And the only reason I survived was that Bert was so bad that the science committee demanded that they do something. And so the administrator brought in a chief scientist to oversee Bert. The chief scientist happened to be my boss from when I was a scientist at Goddard. So he went, as soon as he showed up, he went to the administrator and said, "Make Pellerin director now." So that was the end of that. So I thought I'd just tell those kind of stories. That's entertaining.
Yeah, I think so. I think what's nice about it is you've kind of interleaved the 40 principles
Yeah.
with how they impacted your life, even though you may not have at the time of the story known that they were the principles, right? The bedrock.
I just intuited them. I didn't.
Yeah. But now you've labeled them and are giving people a way to direct themselves.
I could not name what was happening.
Right.
So there's actually 2 more similar events with AXAF. And
okay.
I can continue or just.
Yeah, I've got time.
Okay, so the next thing happens, and this is really dangerous. AXAF manages to get in the NASA budget. And that's the hard fight. There's typically 10 times as many good ideas fighting for money in the space science program.
Right.
Literally. So to get to the top slot was very difficult, and I managed to do it. And the guy who's now in charge, a guy named Lynn Fisk, also a scientist from Goddard that I used to work with, but I think objective about things. He realized he understands the importance of the Great Observatory's idea. He understands AXAF. And normally when you get into the fight is in NASA. And once you get out of NASA, it's very rare that something gets killed by office. So by the way, it goes next to the Office of Management and Budget, which is kind of the president's staff. But to get in the president's budget or not, it's very rare that something like that would be attacked in that phase. Very unusual. So, and when you have something and that you get what they call the markup from OMB for NASA came the day after Thanksgiving. So you plan on being at work that Friday if you have something in the budget. So I went routinely. I did, of course. It's a very big program, $3 billion program. So I go into work, and the administrator at the time was a guy that I knew quite well. uh, what's his name, Jim Fletcher. And the way I knew him was that he was administrator when I was early at NASA. I met him sort of casually and socially. He left the job and did some consulting work for National Science Foundation, particularly in their balloon program. And there was a committee he was on that I interfaced with quite a lot to coordinate ballooning between us and the National Science Foundation. And other people kind of treated him like, I don't say badly, but I treated him with the respect of still being administrator. Their attitude was, he's not administrator. I don't need to be nice to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then so he was basically done with NASA. Challenger happened, and Reagan's looking to replace for a new administrator. Reagan saw his photograph in the Washington Post newspaper. He was in town for something else. Reagan assumed he was there to interview for NASA. He wasn't. They calls him up and asks him to come back. So I asked him, did you want to come back? He said, no. I said, why'd you do it? He said, well, it's awfully hard to say no to the president, which I think is true. So
Yeah.
He's back, and now I'm in his office once a month. He said, you're the only person that tells me the truth about what's going on in the agency. So I'm an hour a month in his office and telling him about what I'm seeing in the workforce. And so that came from our interaction when he was not. So I know him quite well. So he calls me and says, Charlie, OMB's taking AXAF out of the budget. I'm like, oh my God. Said, can I reclama this? Reclama means make an appeal, basically.
Mm.
He said, no. He said, I can't do that. He said, they've taken out other things that are more important than anything in the science program. They've taken out civil service salary, taken out test stands for the shuttle main engines. I can't help you. So I explained the Gray Observatory. He says, well, I'll think about it. So I go back to my desk and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what have I got to do here? What I've got to do is I've got to come up with something that is so compelling that the director of OMB will give in rather than risk taking this to the president. Because if the administrator cares about something, in the end, he can ask for the president to adjudicate the dispute. And,
Right.
and nobody wants to do this. So, but if it looks like a fairly weak argument, they might just do it for fun to embarrass you. The
Mm-hmm.
argument's really strong, they might give in. So I go to my desk, clear my calendar, and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, only learned one thing in Harvard Business School, difference between marketing and selling. So what is it that Reagan cares about? Okay. And I thought, well, okay, the money to buy this. Well, this is a drop in the bucket in the national budget. This is nothing. Okay, that doesn't help. X-ray astronomy. Well, my friend Ricardo, who later got a Nobel Prize in physics, I called him up because I knew he had lunch. He went to a lunch with the president thing, had lunch with Reagan, and Ricardo's X-ray astronomer. He's a fan of AXAF, of course. So I said, what did you talk to Reagan about AXAF? He said, I did. I said, great, what happened? He said, well, I started to explain about X-ray astronomy and Reagan interrupted me and said, yeah, I've seen the X-rays from the sun. Ricardo said, you have? He said, yeah. Ricardo's thinking, all right, this is great. Because when you're in England and it's really cloudy out and you stand up and squint your eyes, look at the sun, you're seeing solar X-rays. Well, Ricardo didn't want to tell him that X-rays don't come through the atmosphere. So that wasn't going to work. So science doesn't work, money doesn't work. What have I got? So I sat there pondering this for like hours. I mean, just thinking about it in dead silence. Then I got it. I got the answer. I'd been picked to chair the first working group of the Soviet Union for astronomy. And my friend, my Russian counterpart, Rashid Sunyaev, was also an X-ray astronomer. And he had showed me a picture of his little X-ray instrument on the Mir space station. He gave me a photograph of it. So I thought, what Reagan cares about is evil empire. So I made two charts with one with AXAF with a translucent American flag on top of it. Other one with the Mir space station. Now, this is cheating a little bit because his instrument was a small thing on Mir, but nobody else knew what they're looking at. Okay,
Right.
The Soviet space station. The Soviet Union flag on top entitled it, "To whom will the future in space belong?" So now I gotta get this to OMB, and I know Fletcher's not gonna do it because this would be an argument that he doesn't want to make.
Right.
So I tried to get a little bit of air cover. I called my boss's admin lady and said, I got some charts for OMBs. Anybody want to look at them? She said, no. I didn't tell her it's a requirement. I didn't tell her that I've been running the agency. I didn't tell her what it was. And it would not be unusual for me to go talk to the OMB examiner over there. I mean, I would do that once a year. They have a question about something.
Yep.
We go and talk to them. I thought, okay, past that gate. I called the administrator's admin, had the same conversation. No, we're not interested. So what I did is I learned that the Reagan doesn't look at geographs. He looks at 2 foot by 4 foot foam boards.
Mm-hmm.
And my contractor found a company in town that makes these. And they made these 4 slides. The first one was about AXAF, the second was about the science, the third was about the programmatics, and the fourth was this killer slide. So maybe the 4 foam boards. Now I've got to get them over there. So I put them in a brown wrapper with a mailing address that just had the NASA address, no name on it. And to Director OMB, that's all said on the label. And I hired a service.
Like a courier.
Yeah. A courier service.
Gosh.
Courier service, take them over there. So off they go. And next day, I get a call from Fletcher. He says, Charlie, the damnedest things just happened. AXAF's back in the budget. You know anything about this? No, sir. If I'd gotten caught doing that, I would have been fired for sure.
All right.
That was the next test. So that was, again, how committed are you? And
Yeah.
then the final test was, actually there were 2 more. The next test was the Congress didn't want to approve it. And the reason they didn't want to approve it was that they had, this was the House Appropriations chair. They had the staffer had a consultant that said the mirrors couldn't be built. And by the way, the mirrors are being built by Perkin-Elmer. And by now it's after the Hubble mirror flaw. And these are much more difficult mirrors. These are mirrors grazing incidents. The x-rays come in and bounce off 2 surfaces, very slight angle and focus. This is far, far more difficult than Hubble's mirror. Because I've got a consultant says the mirrors can't be built, especially for the money you've got. So one of my scientists, external scientists, mounted a letter writing campaign, got 150 letters written to this committee about the telescope. So staffer calls up and says, Boland, who's the member, has told me stop these damn letters. Can you stop them? I said, well, I didn't start them. Of course, that'd be illegal. But if I could show that we're going to get something moving here, I could tell them and that would stop it. So I'll make a deal, okay? You gave me a budget to build those mirrors. I forget what it was, maybe $500 million. And a schedule says, you do the mirrors on that budget and that schedule, and they meet the requirements. You get your full telescope appropriate, no more conversation, be automatic. If you don't, if you overrun or don't meet those requirements, you cancel a telescope.
Yep.
I shook hands, that's the deal. So we're chugging along. At that time, TRW had won the prime contract and Marshall is managing the mirrors. So I contacted, I had good relationships with TRW, did a lot of work with them. I got their most senior executive involved with civil space and said, I'm going to put the contract for the mirrors under you. And I expect you to give me a report once every 2 weeks as to how we're doing. And if you get these mirrors done at Perkin-Elmer, you keep your program. If not, the program's over and you're going to lose everything. He said, deal. I went to Perkin-Elmer and the guy who's managing the mirrors agreed to give me an in-person briefing once a week. So he flew to Washington once a week. He and I had dinner at a local restaurant and he briefed me on the mirrors. We made the thing with 1 week to spare and got the program. So that was that test. Next test is Lynn Fisk, my boss, brings me to his office and shows me a graph, and it's a graph of his budget for his whole office. And the planetary mission got started a year after me. And now we're peaking about the same time. So there's a big bulge in the budget above the thing. And he showed me this and he just said, I'm not gonna cut the base program, which was the research program and data analysis, the grants to fund this. And it can't be funded, of course. And so I looked at it, and I didn't have to say anything more, I got it. So my first response is I'm gonna attack the planetary mission, get rid of it, that'll solve my problem. And I'm realizing their politics are much bigger than mine. They're centralized at one location, Jet Propulsion.
Right.
It's a contractor with a board of directors that has political clout. They've got the Planetary Society. I don't have any of these things. I'm gonna lose a political battle. So I said, it's time for first principles thinking. What is the first principle of this mission? Remember, it was a low Earth orbit mission like Hubble. Well, I knew that Hubble had an observing time of like 20% on target. And the reason is these big instruments with a fast slew, it's about the rate a minute hand turns on a clock. And you can't observe when the sun's too close, Earth's too close, or there's a planet in the way or something. But the Earth was the biggest problem since you're in low Earth orbit, you're right next to the Earth.
Yep.
So I said, the only thing that matters is number of photons. What if I took the servicing off, put this thing in high Earth orbit? Now I'd get at least a factor of 5. I'd get 80% observing efficiency, maybe better compared to 20. If I did that, I can reduce everything by a factor of 4. So
Wow.
in one afternoon with a back of envelope, I redesigned the mission and cut the cost by a factor of 3. And took off one of the instruments that should never have been there in the first place. I just never looked carefully enough. I trusted my scientists.
Right.
Instead of the 5 mirrors, cut it down to 3. So everything became much, much simpler. So I got enormous pushback for this, fighting me at every level. The science community hung me in effigy out on the mall. And they said, you know, this is a terrible thing to do. We don't have any servicing. It's going to be dead in 2 years. I said, no, there are 2 things here. First is TRW, excellent contractor. I trust them totally. Secondly, a mission in high Earth orbit is much more benign than going in low Earth orbit. The reason is in low Earth orbit, you go through this heat cold cycle every 90 minutes. You go from blazing sun, everything's hot, to behind the Earth, everything's cold. Every 90 minutes, this is a hard thing on everything. Up in high Earth orbit, you don't have any of that. You can put it up in an orbit where it just sits in the sun all the time.
Yeah.
You're going in and out of the radiation belts. You don't have that in high Earth orbit. So I said it's a more benign thing. And the center that worked for me, Marshall Space Flight Center, building this thing, they refused to even study it. So I can tell them, put constraints on what they can build, but I can't make them do something they don't want to do very easily.
Right.
So I go down and meet with the center director and said, you got to fire this guy. He's not doing what I tell him. And he was, I knew him too. You know, Fred will come around. Fred's a good guy. I know Fred for years. Don't worry, he'll come around. Just be patient. Fred never did come around. So I went to TRW and said, will you fund this study on profit for me? And they said, yeah, we will. They understood it.
Yeah.
So did the study, reduced the budget by a factor of 3, and the thing got finished and got launched. And it just finished its 21st year of science operations, still working like originally. So
that's incredible.
So that's what happens when you're 100% committed to something.
Right.
And was the storyline valid? One of my friends said recently, I haven't seen any new physics lately. And I said, well, I'm not dead yet, so be patient. So whether we're going to get, by the way, we do understand also how quasars make so much energy. It's really fascinating. The source is actually the weakest force. The second weakest force in nature, arguably the weakest, gravity. It's a gravitational thing involving the collapse of a black hole. So we know how that works. And the of the 4 missions, they're all 4 successful. infrared mission quit when it ran out of its coolant, superfluid helium coolant. The gamma ray mission, the main instrument exhausted its gas and it was deorbited. Hubble's still working and AXAF's still working.
Yeah.
And people are still analyzing. So
Yeah. And then how does the new telescope fit in? Is it
it's a different wave band.
right?
It's in a way, it's a really important instrument and it's very specialized. It is designed totally for the early universe.
Right. Okay.
So the universe, we believe, was formed in this thing called the Big Bang. By the way, that blink is the cameras on my front door with the elevator.
Gotcha.
Elevator
Gotcha.
going in and out. Put this in a drawer. It's not in here anymore, hopefully. So they're calling it a great observatory, and it's an important wave band, but it's not as, I must say, to me, it's a narrower interest than these other broad measurements. Very,
Gotcha.
but so the Big Bang, we all believe this is a matter of fact. I think it's right. The universe created this Big Bang, and the evidence for that is this microwave background. So this very hot plasma over 13.8 billion years got redshifted down into this microwave region.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of interesting questions about the early universe because parts of it don't quite make sense. So one of the problems is that the Big Bang was completely highly homogeneous. The remnant radiation, the microwave background, is very isotropic, means it's very minor, parts in 1 to the 1,000 variation in intensity. So how did that very minor amount of let's say gradation in it, how did that evolve into galaxies and everything else that we know? That's a big question.
Yeah.
Second is, what happened in the early universe? So to study that region, you need to go into these wave bands. Everything that happened a long time ago is down in this sub-millimeter band. It's near infrared radiation.
Okay.
So it's an important mission, and I don't know how much integration it has with the other
observatories.
But by the way, I worked on that as a proposal for TRW. I was
right
after I left NASA.
Yep.
And, I did not approve of what they did. I tried to get them to do what I did with AXAF I said, just get 5 smart people in a room for a day and ask, how can you make this thing order of magnitude less complex and do it faster? And NASA refused to listen to me. And I was in a position of authority. I would have done it. I think I could have launched it in 5 years. Instead, it took more than 25. And $10 billion, I could have done it for 1, I think. A small version. My argument was, let's go explore this band with a specialized mission. And then if the band has enough merit, let's build a bigger telescope for it.
Right.
But they didn't do that.
No.
I think by the luck of God, the thing was ever finished, frankly, but it was.
Right.
So I was wrong. They got there.
Have you watched the documentary on that, on the launch and the building?
I knew it pretty well. I was close to it the whole time. I did work for the teams building it.
Gotcha.
I don't think I did not watch a documentary, but I don't think I needed to.
It was clear that there was some 4D in the back of it.
Well, so I trained the TRW team extensively. I later worked with the Goddard team on it, and Frank also did workshops with the Goddard team.
Right.
So we did a lot of 4D workshops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the shaker and mover was this guy, John Mather, who won the Nobel Prize with this earlier mission that measured the background. And he was a big fan of 4D. He advocated my book.
Right.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
So maybe that's my talk about the great observatories and the challenges that you can encounter and how you can overcome if you really want to.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Like I said, the interleaving, it's people learn through stories, and
That's the
um
idea.
yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that story about how many times you were stymied um with the X-ray observatory. So that was really interesting.
I,
Really interesting.
the things I did there were actually greater peril than what I did for Hubble. By the way,
Interesting.
I asked myself, uh, thinking about this, if I hadn't done that for Hubble, would somebody else have done it? Let's just say that they fired me right off the spot and I never had a chance to do it. I think that what would have happened here is that over time, somebody would have, the contractors or institute, somebody would have said, wait a minute, there's a way to fix this. We gotta go do it. And then they probably would have gone and shown Mikulski, talked to her and gotten her on board to agree with it. Then she would have said, put it in the budget and I'll deal with it. And you would have had a conventional approach to a new project. So it would have then started maybe 3 years later.
You think that would have been in time for Hubble though? Because wasn't there
No, it
another
wasn't.
problem?
Yeah, the gyros were failing. So
Hmm.
the gyros, by the time you got there, you never finished the project. Before you finished the project, the gyros would have failed. Uh,
Right.
I guess you could have imagined it'd be a servicing mission to do nothing but repair the gyros and deal with them
Right.
later. But at some point, someone's gonna say uncle on this thing. I mean,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah, for sure.
maybe Mikulski wouldn't agree. Just say no. I mean, especially if we tell her, if we miss it by, a year later, the gyros are gonna kill it anyway. I don't, I don't, I cannot state unequivocally that it would never have been fixed, but I
Yeah.
think it's unlikely. And what's interesting to me is that if she had said to me, Charlie, I agree, let's put a fix together, put it in the budget. What I would have done is that, I would have gone back to the office, I would have been
Right.
no impetus to do something completely different. And I would have, I would have just let the project run like any other project, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
I mean, the whole bureaucracy is lining up behind it now as a normal project. So we
mhm.
gotta get some, I probably would have reprogrammed some money legally now to do some study work and get
Right.
it. But would we have made it in time before the gyros failed? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And by the way, maybe people just wouldn't be interested in hearing about it. Maybe they said, the administrator and it might be that, I don't know Dick truly well enough, whether he had bigger issues with the Congress than my problems.
Right.
Maybe he would have agreed with her. Maybe he would have said, look, it's time to, who knows? I,
Yeah.
I can't say unequivocally what would happen, but I sure don't think it's likely that if somebody hadn't, and very few people that I encountered at NASA had the male anatomy to do what I did with these things.
Right. Right.
I think,
Yeah. I think opportunity and preparation make a difference.
yeah, so,
Timing.
yeah, so I, the AXAF story's not been told very much, and I think it's really interesting, so.
Yeah. I've not heard it. So yeah, I thought that was a good.
I think of all the things I did, the thing that would have really been fatal is if someone had figured out that I went around, the administrator took those charts down. That would have been a sin
Right.
redemption.
Hmm.
And all I can think of is that, so if I don't do this, it's the end of the Gray Observatories, that's for certain, because what's gonna
Right.
happen is next year, when I bring AXAF up for its internal competition, my opponents are gonna say, don't waste your breath on that. OMB canceled it last year. Why wouldn't they do it again? And I don't have any
Right.
argument for that. So
Yep.
it was the end of the Great Observatory's idea completely. It probably never happened.
Yep. Yeah, it's incredible.
So
Incredible. Well, thank you for the extra time and the extra stories. I really appreciate it. And we'll
I enjoyed
look
it. So
Yeah,
next week we'll get back to business as usual. I thought this was a worthwhile diversion. Do you agree?
no, I enjoyed it. Just to let you know, I may not make next week. We're gonna be in New York trying to get Jordan settled in her apartment in Brooklyn. So,
Brooklyn,
what
huh?
would that be? Yeah, she's in forget which neighborhood in Brooklyn it is, but yeah. So that's what